Hello and welcome to Conversations with Hannah. I am joined here today with several people you will all recognize, most of whom are wearing multiple hats in this conversation. I have Jason Pellich, who's the chair of the Shrewsbury School Committee. I have Jim Kane, who is on the Board of Selectmen and also chairing the Beal Building Committee, and my husband. And I have Beth Cassavant, who is on the Board of Selectmen as well. And Beth, along with Jason, are co-chairs of the ballot committee that was formed and able to make sure that people understand really what the decision is that we're going to have before us on November 6th, which is going to impact us locally. So on Election Day, which is coming up rather quickly, I think it's 26 days now, 25 or 26 days.
We're not counting.
We're counting to early voting.
Yeah. There is going to be a question, an opportunity for the residents of Shrewsbury to weigh in on whether or not we support a new Beal School. It's something that we all around this table feel very strongly about, that it's the right decision, and that's why we're going to have this show today and talk a little bit about it. But we want to make sure, first and foremost, that everyone out there is aware that this is going to be a question, and to make sure that they really understand all the work that has been done to get to this point, and why this is a project that has seen quite a bit of support in town, which has been great.
Yeah.
And also not a lot of opposition, which on the one hand is great because I think people believe that this is a good project. On the other hand, sometimes that means it's not talked about as much. So the effort today is to make sure that people are well aware of it. So Jason, why don't you start with just a little bit of where we're at with the Beal School and what necessitated this discussion about having a new one?
Sure. Well, before I talk about the structure itself, I'll take a step back and talk about Shrewsbury Public Schools as a district and where we are as a school district, because from the school department's perspective, this isn't just a vote and a project about Beal or about the Beal community. This is something we see as having the potential to have a very positive impact on our entire student population, on the entire school community. Beal right now is an early childhood center, so it's primarily kindergarten with a few sections of overflow first grade from Floral Street School.
Yes.
The building is not adequate to meet the department's space needs for those programs it's already providing, and I think Jim will talk a little bit more about the building itself and what's going on there. But stepping back again as a district, we're seeing a lot of stressed capacity issues. Shrewsbury continues to grow. It continues to be a desirable place to live. Certainly it's a community we all care a great deal about, and a lot of folks can see that. People are still coming here because of the quality of the community. People still want their kids in Shrewsbury Public Schools, and the school department is continuing to grapple with the results of that growth. And we see throughout our elementary school system, not just with Beal, but throughout the elementary system, stressed capacity. In most of our elementary schools, we see classes a little larger than we would like. We see spaces that are not being used for their original or designated purposes. We don't have dedicated spaces for art and music, which is pretty much par for the course for an elementary education, especially in Massachusetts, and we don't have that in Shrewsbury. And so we look at Beal as something that's not just about the kids who are there or the families who might live near the proposed new school. We look at it as something that's going to have a positive impact on the whole district. So the proposed project, instead of just replacing the early childhood center, is going to be an entire 790 student K through 4 elementary school. So we will go to a system of 5 K through 4 elementary schools, with Beal being the largest, slightly larger than Floral. And the idea is that this building was designed to meet the town's capacity needs at present, but also projected for growth over the long term. So obviously, Beal has reached the end of its usable life. It's 100 years of age. It's served the town well in many capacities. It hadn't been used as a school setting for, I believe, a few decades, and it was reopened in the late 1980s to house kindergarten. You had a lot of young families in Shrewsbury that had just arrived at the time, and of course the town's growth exploded so much in the 1990s that temporary solution had to remain in place because other space issues took over in terms of priority. We're now dealing with the fact that we've been in a temporary solution for 30 years. We've got a project before us that's going to benefit not just the kids who are going to go to Beal, but all Shrewsbury students across the district. So we really see this as being something that's going to have a positive impact for the whole student population.
And having been parents whose children went to Floral Elementary School, our middle daughter Caitlin actually did her first grade at Beal because of the capacity issues at Floral. At that time, Caitlin's now a junior, so this was many years ago. But in fact, when Jim and I moved here, one of the first things we did was tour Floral Street School right before it opened, which is 21 years ago now. And almost immediately at Floral, because enrollment had caught up with what they thought was a little bit of extra capacity, You had to start diverting classrooms. They originally had 2 art rooms there. It went to 1. You originally had it planned to have all the first grades there. They had to move some of them to Beal. So we've seen this happen over time. And I think that one of the things that is so great about the MSBA process, which I know you're going to talk a little bit about, Jim, is that they really make you go through and understand not only where you are today as a community, but what is your projections for the future, so that you ensure that any dollars that you're spending and any dollars the state is spending is going to get you through the long term and isn't just a short term. So I'm not sure most people are aware of the MSBA process. I don't know if you want to talk about it a little bit, Jim.
Sure. I think what's important to remember is that the Mass School Building Authority actually invited the town to submit for Beal a couple of years ago. However, as the Board of Selectmen and the school committee came to the conclusion that we generally like to keep a priority or 2 in front of the town at the particular time. There were a couple of other major initiatives underway, so we said thank you, but no thank you to that invitation. The invitation by itself indicates the MSBA recognizes the project as being worthy of further focus and the opportunity for funding. Fast forward to 2 years ago, again we're invited, excuse me, again we're invited to submit. We did, and we were recognized as a project worthy of reimbursement from the Commonwealth. So on April 13th, 2016, somehow the time has passed that quickly, the building committee was formed by the special town meeting that also authorized monies to initiate this study. So on the building committee, you have the usual suspects: the town manager, the superintendent of schools, the assistant superintendent of schools for finance, Bob Cox, the superintendent of public buildings, and then one member of the Board of Selectmen, because we have to do something. And then we also have a couple of private residents of Shrewsbury who were added. One is Erin Boucher and the other is John Marciello. John Marciello and his dad built a senior center, and they've been in the building business for decades now, so it's great to have that perspective. Erin Boucher is an attorney with a concentration in construction law. So as we hopefully move forward with this, she'll be able to play a critical role and an independent role relative to a variety of paths that we can take, and actually she already did that with one of the elements of this project. So the committee got underway with its meetings. As of today, we had over 50 meetings. Half of them have been held as public hearings, because early on we wanted to establish the setting for a give and take as people arrived and wanted to participate and offer their ideas relative to school location. There were actually, this was an interesting model, because the school committee could have gone for a more traditional 1 through or a K through 1, or they had options. So as the school committee did a very aggressive outreach as to what the community wanted in the school system, the building committee did an aggressive review of sites. And we started with, I recall, 41 sites, I believe, across town. Some were obvious where you wouldn't put a school, others weren't so obvious. At the same time, the MSBA makes you study the existing site, because they take a very dispassionate view of this. They don't get wrapped up with any emotion about a building or a setting. They have a very straightforward analysis of how many children you're going to serve for what model you're serving. They force you, the town, to submit a whole bunch of data, and then they use other resources to further question that data to make sure you're not overbuilding or underbuilding. They're seeking to get within that realm. I think that's where we are with this number of 790. So as the school committee was initiating its review of how should the school be set to educate children in Shrewsbury, we went about looking for a site and studying the existing site. The existing building, almost 100 years old, has served us well. The reality is, with today's building code, as John Marciello has spoken to thoroughly at meetings, between the seismic code issues and the other matters, sinking money into that building was a losing proposition. Furthermore, there'd be no state reimbursement for sinking money into that building. Adding on to that building at that site, again, it didn't meet the need, there would be no state reimbursement. So as you worked through the various options, the building committee found that the best site for this school, for our town, and where likely growth will be, and given that we're looking for a building that meets our needs today, tomorrow, and in the long term, we've voted to support the Glavin Center. Now, with the town, it had a longer effort underway regarding Glavin, and you and Mike Moore worked to get that legislation to the governor's desk in ample time. So should town meeting approve this, should the voters approve it on November 6th, we can then implement the language within that legislation and receive that parcel of land for this school site. Now, why does that site make sense? Well, if you look at a few of the other sites, a couple of the others were right locations with failing intersections already. Where would you go? They weren't near any neighborhoods. How are you going to have anything close to a neighborhood school when you can't walk to it? This site offers you, I think if you look at the town on a graphic, you've got 140, Route 9, you've got Big Floral east of 140, north of Route 9. You've got this school recommended to be west of 140, south of Route 9. You've got some intrinsic balance there. You have the other existing elementary schools scattered across town. You have the ability to connect this school site to a large neighborhood behind it. And we've got an agreement for an easement with the Shrewsbury Youth Soccer folks who will receive, they have received, the soccer fields on the west side of Lake Street so we can run a sidewalk down that whole route and access another couple of neighborhoods. This proposal is all-inclusive. This proposal has some work to be done to Lake Street in an effort to take that bad curve and a bit of a blindness out of that site to fully capture the strength in the overall Glavin parcel. So we think that's the right site. The MSBA has thus far approved the building design without so much as any real questions, a couple of follow-up matters. They have approved the site, and at this point we're standing ready to receive over $34 million in state reimbursement if a town meeting approves this and if the voters approve it.
And in addition to, if I could just interject,
Sure.
in addition to the folks serving on the building committee with you, we're also working with folks as consultants who we've worked with before successfully. So Lamro Pagano, who has been well known in our community for architects and has served us well. And I believe that is the owner's project manager as well, who someone we've worked with in the past.
Yes, both. I'm sorry for
Yeah.
forgetting that. Yes, the committee picked Lamro Pagano and PMA Associates, who is our owner's project rep. And what's more important to remember about both of those is not only did the building committee choose both of those after an internal process of vetting other applicants, but then because of their record of performance, the MSBA board also approved them unanimously. It's not often that you get two sets of unanimous votes for architect and project manager. So again, I think we have a good team. I think we have a team that has delivered well for the community and its various school buildings and other buildings, because the basic infrastructure of people in many cases have been with us since Floral, Sherwood, and the new library. And I think each one of those projects has worked out well for the community in the long run.
Great. So a lot of work has happened in the last 2 years, and as Jim indicated, the school committee, I think, has been very out front in terms of the conversation that needed to be had relative to options in town, and then I think the building committee, I really give you guys credit for having as many meetings as you did and really inviting people all along the process to be a part of it. Sometimes because it's early on, people aren't as aware of projects as we would hope that they would be. And that really leads to making sure that when you get to the point that you have to have a vote in the community, that you have a group of people who come together and say, I'm really going to help make sure that everyone out there who potentially is going to come vote on this is really well educated about what the options are. And so it was probably, a year and a half ago, I think, that we started talking about there will be a need to have a group of people. Both of you were very gracious in stepping up, Jason and Beth, to co-chair the effort, and I know that we were also very grateful that Jason Molina stepped forward and said he would be willing to be the campaign manager. And so there was a lot of thought that went into, who are the people that we're going to need around the table to help think about how do we talk about this in the community. And even though a lot of people are becoming aware of the project right now, the reality is that even throughout the summer, there was a lot of effort by you and your team to make sure that people were going door to door and having an opportunity to talk about this project out there with voters and to get some feedback on it. And so Beth, what was some of the early takeaways from people door knocking that they were hearing out there in the community?
Well, I will say door knocking started at the end of June. And for the most part, you have a lot of people who either didn't realize that there was a project underway, or didn't realize that they had to vote on it. I think sometimes when you have a building that's 100 years old, people don't see an opposition mounting against a project. They forget that they actually need to take that step.
Right.
And that's pretty much what's been our job and our challenge in this campaign, is educating a large electorate, because we are putting this on the midterm ballot, so we know people are coming out to vote, and getting them that message has been what we've focused on since the summer. So despite all the heat, and I think this was a summer of record heat, our volunteers were still out knocking doors every weekend and many during the week. And we still are doing that and making sure that we focus our effort on reaching as many people as we can, identifying our supporters, and just making people aware that there's a vote and what their role is in making sure that we're successful, because we really do only have this one chance to pass this and to take advantage of that $34 million. Because if this fails, that money is just going to move to the next community. No one's going to wait around.
Can I touch on that for a moment? Because you're 100% correct relative to the MSBA. If we don't take advantage of this invitation, then they will very happily move the monies that would have come to Shrewsbury to another school district. Simple as that. Once again, dispassionate. I happen to enjoy history. So I ask that people just take a look back in not too distant history. Efforts to redo 2 fire stations and build a replacement headquarters were shot down. The next iteration that passed cost the taxpayers more money. The first library project was shot down because it wasn't quite what some people wanted. And the next one, though beautiful, cost us all more money. And this project, I think, is timed at such a point that we can take advantage of this, enjoy the $34 million of state assistance with a unique opportunity to get the parcel of land that I think is well positioned, again, for the immediate and long-term need of our community. The Commonwealth is under pressure to dispose of surplus property. That's why we got the east side of Lake Street for recreation and agricultural purposes for $1. And that's why the Shrewsbury Youth Soccer Association, who sunk all the money into those fields to make them workable over the decades, that's why they got that land for $1, provided it's always held in recreation. And the reason the land is offered to us for the school is simply that. It's a good public purpose. The Commonwealth recognized it, the legislature recognized it, and I'm hoping the people of Shrewsbury will recognize it at town meeting on November 6th.
I think to your point about the library, really the library failed by I think 151 votes.
153.
153. And that shocked everyone because there was the support in the community for that first project, but people believed mistakenly that they didn't need to come out and vote for it because so many people were in support of it.
It was all set.
And I think that's really our concern here is this overwhelming sense that I have not spoken to one person who has not believed that this is the right thing to be doing, which on the one hand is good, but as we referenced earlier, there is also not as much awareness that their vote is critical. And so we really have to play up both sides. And again, you know, the MSBA, when we were invited into this process, there were 26 projects that were approved at that time out of a pool of 97. So there's a whole host of people just in that initial pool that we were in 2 years ago who are still waiting for funding, and meanwhile a whole bunch more communities who have come forward with other projects. So the chance of us ever getting back in the queue is slim to none, and certainly not in a time frame that we need to have happen in our community. So and I think voting, the good news is there's many opportunities to vote.
And just to tack on to what Beth was saying, you know, as our volunteers, we've had a great group of volunteers working very, very hard for months now. The response in the community is very warm, it's very positive, but what we're encountering is you know, awareness and some confusion regarding specifics is pretty common. You know, we as a campaign think that the town made the right choice in doing this election in conjunction with the state election. It's convenient for voters. It'll save the town some money not having to do a special election. Voters only have to come out once. when you cast your ballot in the state election, whether you do so on November 6th election day in your polling place or whether you take advantage of the early voting period, you will be able to cast your ballot for the state and the town election at the same time. It's very convenient for voters. But one of the things that has meant is, you look at the number of folks who usually engage in municipal elections versus the much larger group of folks who usually engage with a state election. And we're talking to a lot of folks who, that they're active members of their community. They know about the school department, they know about Beal, but they haven't necessarily participated in local government before. And so concepts like, what is a debt exclusion? Why is this coming before me as a voter? What do all of these specifics around the project really mean? We recognize that for a large portion of the electorate, they may be exposed to some of these concepts for the first time. So we highly recommend visiting supportbeal.com, which is the campaign's website. As we've been talking to voters on the door, we've tried to keep our message as simple as possible. 3 points, just that the building has reached the end of its usable life. The second being we've got a great investment opportunity to use some state dollars for a great long-term project. And the third, just explaining the mechanics around voting. But for those folks who are interested in some of these concepts and more of a deep dive, we've got a wealth of information on supportbeal.com. But again, for any member of the community, when you go cast your ballot for the state election, we have early voting beginning at the town clerk's office on Monday, October 22nd. For the most part, that's during regular business hours, but there will be 2 days, the 24th and the 30th, where early voting hours will be open until 8 o'clock at night. So just like Election Day, you can go until 8 o'clock and get your voting done early for both the state and the town election. And again, we think that this is as convenient as it can possibly be for members of the community.
And it's all precincts that vote at town hall.
Correct. During the early voting period,
Yes.
all precincts will vote at town hall. On Election Day, November 6th, if you haven't voted by that point, you'll vote at your precinct polling place.
And again, when you go into early vote, unlike if you in the past had voted absentee, there is no paperwork that you fill out. There is nothing additional that you have to do. You simply go in and have the opportunity to cast your vote then, and you're done, and you don't have to worry about it for any other period of time.
And early votes count just the same as Election Day votes. There's a popular misconception, will they only count it if it's close? No, it's run through the machine just the way your regular ballot is. Your early vote is counted the exact same way your Election Day ballot is counted.
And we
Could
did
I
early-
mention one
Sure.
thing? Jason mentions the website. If folks want to know more about the specifics of the MSBA, all of our filings, et cetera, please go on the town website, the town manager's office, and you'll see the Beal School project. Everything is right there. If you still have a follow-up question, feel free to speak to the manager or call Valerie or Dave in the office and leave your number with them, and I'll call you and we'll get you any information that you may need.
I think, the other thing that I have seen out there is that there is, and you referenced this a few minutes ago, I think that the community has really seen with the Sherwood Middle School project and with the library that our town in particular understands how to do these projects and do them, on time or under time, and on budget or under budget. And that is really something that I think, we have a lot to be proud of. And I do think that there has been perhaps a change in understanding about the nature of how these projects work. I mean, the fact is what we're going to be voting on, as Beth likes to say, is like a mortgage. It has a beginning and an end, probably a 20-year term in which we pay for it, and then it goes away. And we have, as a community, and speaking as a finance committee member, we have done a very good job as a community about trying to pace our projects so that we're asking the taxpayers to sort of keep a fairly steady amount of money that's going towards our buildings in town, the capital investments that we have to make. And this is a continuum of that. So there are things that are coming off. So the high school, I believe, is now off. We're no longer paying for that. Floral, I think this is the last year, if last year wasn't the year, one more to pay for the cost to put up the Floral Street School. So these things are paced in a manner in which is respectful of the fact that the taxpayers do underwrite a significant portion of these buildings.
It's similar to home repair. If you own a house, you need to take care of it on a regular, consistent basis. If you let projects go for many, many years, you're going to be faced with an expensive repair all at once. And the leaders of this town are trying to be responsible in spacing out our capital investments.
And the reality is that doing something is not optional. We must do something. We can no longer rely on Beal as an integral part of our school building facilities. We have to change it. It doesn't either meet the sizing requirement, and the building itself needs significant investment regardless of what goes on there. So, the choice we have in front of us is, do we want to accept $34 million in state aid and have them be a part of this next iteration of a school building? That's really the choice in front of us. So it's not a do something or not do something. It is a question of, we need to do something, and we believe that this is the best solution to our problem, because it's a shared investment and it's a long-term solution. It's not a stopgap. It's not something that buys us 5 or 10 years. It's a 50, 60 year longer solution.
Maybe even 100.
Yeah, maybe even 100.
I spoke to a gentleman a couple days ago about the project, and he was an older gentleman, definitely a senior, and he said, I remember opening the windows in Beal and having to use the long pole and crank them. And I said, the windows haven't changed, and he was so surprised.
That's funny.
And he certainly was supportive of the project, but that was his memory. And I just thought that was really indicative of why we need to do something now.
And I think one other question that I sometimes get asked about is, well, what will happen to the Beal building? And there is a reuse committee that has been set up that would take a look at that. Again, it goes to the notion that most people aren't questioning that something needs to be done and that it no longer fits the school department's needs. But they're also curious as to, well, what then happens? So there is a group of people that have been appointed.
Well, the Board of Selectmen thought it was important to have basically both ends covered. That if we get the vote and we move forward with a new Beal, people should have some sense of, well, what could happen with the old Beal? And unlike in some towns, we will not be looking to maintain a municipal or school presence. We will look to vacate the building. The school committee, I think, took that official vote already, that at some point, the school department will get out, municipality has no interest in it. The question then becomes of some reuse. So the board did create a reuse committee. And at the same time, just through happenstance, a couple of grants became available for downtown parking and looking at what downtown, the center area could be. So those two are now playing nicely off of the potential for the Beal School to become available. Obviously, there's a desire for additional, what I'll call senior housing in town. However, at this point, there's no matching federal dollars under the traditional model. Given that it's an older structure, could somebody use tax increment financing, tax credits as a way of financing their proposal? Perhaps. Again, though, I think a great example why we'll see if we'll hopefully get the vote on November 6th. We'll then move forward. That committee will engage much more in high speed and then figure out what the private sector could do. Because if you're going to get into any creative financing, we all know that the public sector ought to just stand back, put it out, see what great ideas come forward, and then allow the private sector to actually finance it and do the work. But there's a lot of details, and again, refresh the community when it becomes real, hopefully.
And I'm sure, much like this process has been, it will be a very open and transparent process where people can weigh in on it. We are almost out of time. I really want to thank all of you for coming here today and having this discussion. And I think, if people, again, if they could go to supportbeal.com and take a look at the information there. If they have questions, they can go to the town website and get more information from the building committee's perspective. But most importantly, please remember to come out and vote.
And ask for your second ballot.
And you do need to ask, because there are 2 ballots. When you're coming out, you'll have a state ballot and you will have a local ballot. So when you walk in, please make sure that you do ask for both of them. And again, I would stress, early voting starts on October 22nd. There are multiple opportunities to vote between now and November 6th. November 6th at 7:59 p.m. is the last opportunity to vote, so please make sure that you get it done before then. But this is a really terrific opportunity for us as a community to have a shared investment that really makes the most amount of sense to the taxpayers and is the right solution for the projected enrollment in our town. So please come out and vote on Tuesday, November 6th, and thank you for joining us today.